I know, Robert, there's been a couple folks who were like regulars here on this. Yeah. So Robert says he can hear people, but he can't be heard. Can everybody mute themselves for a second? All right, we're gonna unmute everybody one at a time. Shira, can you unmute yourself?
Yes.
Okay. Tom.
How's this?
Okay. Mark.
This is Mark.
Gail.
Okay.
Catherine.
Yes.
Curtis.
Good afternoon.
Wendy.
Hi there.
Robert. All right, no more pulsing. We can't hear Robert, but maybe you can, I don't know if we lose everybody if you go off and come back, Robert, do we? So, all right, we'll have you. Do you want to, well, if you need to add something, yeah, okay, unless you want to come here in my office. So I guess we should start. There's no more pulsing. I know there's a couple folks who've been regulars here, but I think we just need to go forward here, right? So everybody got the updated ordinance. So why don't we just start with Tom, you or Curtis just going over the changes from the last version?
Sure. Yeah, there were just a couple of, aside from a few tiny grammar changes, there were a few changes that we made. The first is on page 2, where one of the objectives is to also discourage the planting of trees that are too shady and cut back on views. We have
Where is that? So tell us what you added.
just the words planting and.
Where,
Yeah,
what number are you? What
Oh, sure. It's right at the top. It's 816-2.206D.
D, discourage the planting and maintenance of trees that provide excessive shade and unduly diminish desirable views.
Right.
Okay,
Can we ask questions as we go along, or should
sure,
we wait?
yeah, I think that makes sense, yes.
Okay, just a quick suggestion, perhaps maintenance of tree species, because I think there are certain species that are known to be problematic, and that may help narrow the scope of what we're trying to say here.
I'm sorry, you're saying,
Discourage the planting and maintenance of tree species that provide excessive shade. I mean, certain ones don't, certain
Right.
ones do.
But it applies to all trees that might, I think it's okay to leave it open.
we could say of trees and tree species. Is that, because there could be
It's
some, there
redundant.
could be some species, there could be some species that in and of themselves are not an issue, but the trees could be if they're not maintained properly. That's why the word maintenance is here. So that's why I think trees would probably capture the tree species, because you have to maintain the trees. There could be a species that maybe theoretically isn't an issue, but if it's not maintained, it becomes an issue.
Thank you, that clarifies it.
Okay. Tom?
And so the next few changes are in section 816-2.208 definitions. The first one is there's a new or revised definition of arborist, which there's two types of people who qualify as an arborist. an arborist report is
So
defined.
the idea there is to make sure that's a true arborist that's involved, not some unlicensed, uncertified person.
Yeah,
right?
just not any person with like a chainsaw.
Got it. Okay. I guess I'm not counted in that then. All right.
You never know.
And then we also have a definition for arborist's report, which is basically says in broad terms what the report should consist of.
Got it.
And then we added a definition of tree. So it's a live woody plant with either a single perennial stem, which is the trunk, or several perennial stems. So like kind of big tree-like bush things.
Does that include bamboo?
I think those are multiple perennial stems, yes.
I would
Can you
think so.
just remind us of the significance of the word perennial? In this,
Well,
Perennial-
annuals are just usually the like little flowers that die each year. And so this is something that, you know,
why is that critical?
and that's how it's defined elsewhere in the code. And I think that, you know, if it's not perennial, it's not a tree, just generally.
Yeah, and I'm looking it up. Trees, shrubs, and vines are woody perennials. They do not die back to the ground every year with the change of seasons, even though some may lose their foliage.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thank
So,
you.
yeah. Okay. Oh, we have that humming again, but that's okay. It's minimum. It's okay, moving through other changes.
Yeah, so the next definition, the final one is on page 3
Right.
at the
view.
top K. And so we amended that definition to kind of add clarity to what a view is.
Is this the same definition we use in the planning ordinance?
It's a little different. This is,
Just a question.
go ahead.
Wendy, you're cutting in and out.
Okay.
Wendy, you're freezing. You may want to turn off your video and we just hear your audio. You want to turn off your video a sec? That way maybe we can hear you clearly because you're freezing.
Maybe she could put it in the chat.
I think she's turning off her video, right?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was not clear that you were talking to me. Let's see if this helps. I just had a question. Do we need to include, say, call out decks, patios, yards? It talks about the primary living areas of a residence. Will there be any problem if we don't call out decks, patios, yards? And if not, that's fine. Just wondered.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that the idea is that it's like, if it's blocking a view from inside your house. So if like you have a deck way below somehow, like you're on a steep grade and you can't necessarily see from your deck, but you can see from your living room, then your view isn't blocked under this. Yeah, this ordinance came from, it's basically the same as the Sausalito tree view ordinance. And the way it differs from the Kensington overlay ordinance is that is a views from any window in any habitable space of a
Yeah,
residence.
let me read the one from I pulled it up, Tom.
Yeah,
The Kensington ordinance says view means a scene from a window in habitable space of a neighboring residence. In this case, it's the residence where the term view includes both upslope and downslope scenes, but is distant or panoramic range in nature as opposed to short range. Views include, but are not limited to scenes of skylines, bridges, distant cities, distinctive geologic features, hillside terrain, wooded canyons, ridges, and bodies of water. So that last sentence is the same. The term view here in our ordinance says includes both upslope and downslope vistas or scenes. You added the word scenes. Vistas or scenes, but is distant or panoramic in nature as opposed to short. So you're adding the word vistas in addition to scene in two cases. So tell me the meaning of vista and where that came from.
I think that was just from Sausalito.
Got it.
Yeah,
Okay. Vista, that's where you came with vista. And
right.
you say it means a range of sight, including pleasing vistas or scenes. Why do we say pleasing? Isn't it just vistas or scenes from the primary living area? And it includes, I'm just saying, pleasing is sort of a subjective term.
It
Where did
is.
that,
I
where
mean,
did
we
that
can
come
remove
from?
it, but then also, if like, and I don't, and this is probably a bad example, but if like the tree is blocking your view of a dump, and I don't think there are any dumps in Kensington, then maybe we don't care whether.
Yeah, I mean, because in the planning ordinance, it's a scene, vista or scene from a window, and then we say it includes upslope and downslope scenes. But and then views include but are not limited to scenes of skylines, bridges, distant cities, distinctive. I mean, I think that was the real definition is, yeah, I guess, I don't know how people feel, whether it should be pleasing. Yeah, I mean, whether adding that word is, makes sense.
I don't think it matters one way or the other, so if you want us to take it out, that's fine as well.
Yeah.
Is there a moderator? Are we supposed to be called on?
Oh, I will do that. So I was just finishing, I'll call on you, Catherine, next. I just wanted to get that clarified. So, okay, are we keeping in pleasing? I guess.
Well-
Yeah, go ahead, Catherine.
I just wanted to say I really like the Sausalito definition as it stands now in red, including pleasing. It's a complete and sort of a complete definition that gives really a feeling of what we're talking about. So I like it the way it is now.
Pleasing. In other words, the draft before us, which is pleasing vistas or scenes.
Yeah, the
Right.
draft before us is what I like. I think it's
Right.
expressive and
Well,
complete.
the draft,
It
right.
gives
The,
it-
the draft before us is not the whole, the one we have before us is a mix of both the Kensington planning ordinance with some terms from the Sausalito ordinance. So just so you know, it is not this K is presented to us is not word for word the Sausalito definition. It has much from the current Kensington ordinance definition, incorporating some words from the Sausalito.
Oh, okay, John. Well, I'll just say I like it the way it is.
Got it. Okay. I just wanted to clarify that you weren't saying go to the Sausalito definition, go to the definition that's being presented to us. Right?
Yeah, the
Okay.
definition presented is great.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, and,
Yeah.
and pleasing is not in Kensington, but it's in Sausalito, but it sounds like the will of the group is to keep the word
Yeah.
pleasing.
The second and third sentences are
Uh-huh.
pretty much taken, other than adding the word vistas, are taken from the Kensington ordinance. And I think that makes sense because we spent a lot of time dealing with that, and you've added some terms from the Sausalito ordinance into this, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Got it. Okay.
I'm just waiting for the first issue that goes before the tree arbitration board where somebody says their view of the Richmond refinery is pleasing.
Yeah. I mean, if you could see the bay and the bridge, I mean, you can't, right? I mean, here's the thing. If you see the refinery, you probably see the Richmond Centerfeld Bridge and part of the bay, right? So, yeah, right.
It's just like sugar.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Anything else? Those were the changes, right?
Yeah, and then there was one more change at the
Oh, yeah.
end, way at the end on page 9.
Yeah.
816-2.806. It's just, it's addressing the Solar Shade Control Act. And it basically says that nothing in this ordinance prohibits somebody from separately, enforcing the Solar Shade Act. And that basically is, if your tree blocks my solar panels, you can file a private nuisance action against me for my trees because they're blocking your solar.
Right,
That's a separate procedure under state law.
right.
We're just saying that this ordinance doesn't preclude anybody from using that statute.
So I have a bunch of questions and I didn't remember this.
Yeah, and before we get into the questions, we're one other, Gail, unless you have it on what we just covered.
No, this is
Okay.
something else. Yeah.
We were gonna respond, to some questions that were raised about inclusion from Shira. And did you have that? So the first question, well, there were several I think we dealt with was, are protected trees exempt from this ordinance, or do they have the same status as any other tree when it comes to this ordinance? Where it says, I guess, and that ordinance is undergoing changes. So Tom, did you want to respond to that?
Right, so we do address that on page 5. It's 816-2.416A. So that if there's a ruling or a determination that there needs to be a change to your tree so that somebody else's view can be restored.
Which section is this?
Oh, sure, I'm talking about on page 5.
Yep.
816-2.416A.
Yeah, restorative actions must be consistent with all applicable statutes, ordinances, and regulations. A restorative action involving a protected tree must comply with chapter 816.6, right?
Yeah, so basically what that means is there's agreement that a protected tree has to be modified to restore somebody's view. You still have to go and get a tree permit from the county to make changes to that tree.
The other related questions, what is the relation between the protections afforded protected trees under this article in the tree ordinance and rights awarded to neighbors under the Kensington? And what are Kensington neighbors entitled to do to a protected tree on someone else's property in the name of preserving their view?
Right, so yeah, so I think that, yeah, you go through the process under this ordinance that we're looking at now, where there's, a final determination that a tree should be modified. And then part of that would be if that tree that's going to be modified is a protected tree under the tree preservation ordinance, chapter 816-6, then the tree owner has to go in and get a permit from the county to make changes to that tree.
And then on some, I guess, let me just see, on some of the other issues.
Excuse me one moment before we jump from there.
Yes,
If I understood you correctly, so if I have a protected tree in my yard,
Right.
a live oak, for example, and my neighbor wants to trim it to preserve their view, are you saying that then I have to get a permit so that they can cut the tree?
Well, and it's not like they get to come in on your property anyways and cut your tree. It's like there's the decision from the tree arbitration board or whatever that this is the change that's gonna happen. But yeah, since you own that tree and it's protected under the other ordinance, you have to go get the permit.
This is implying that the person with the protected tree wants to have that tree cut.
well, it implies that there's been an outcome out of this process that recommends that the tree be cut. In other words,
So
if they
protected tree is
unilaterally
not
want it
protected.
cut, right? And if they unilaterally want it cut, that doesn't mean you have to cut it unless you go through this process. And the outcome of the process is that there needs to be a trimming of the tree.
So what I'm hearing then is protected trees are not actually protected. Am I wrong? I mean, what are they, other than one needs a license to do something to them?
Well, and that's kind of how the tree protection ordinance works. I mean, trees are protected, but there's circumstances where, they may have to be trimmed or removed for a project or something like that. And so in that case, the county requires you to go in and get a permit.
So if there's like a heritage tree, same thing?
Yeah,
Someone-
no, that's how the ordinance works. I mean, I think there was an item on the board's agenda on Tuesday where there was or maybe 2 weeks ago,
Yeah.
where there was a project and involved cutting down some protected trees. So the project applicant had to go in and get a permit to cut those down. So they're protected. And the way they're protected is if you're going to make changes to those trees or remove them, you have to get a permit to do that.
Right. It doesn't mean the tree can't be trimmed or modified, and in some cases removed. It means there's a standard about whether that's allowed and how it's allowed. So you have to go through a county process.
Okay.
So can I ask a question then? So let's say somebody wants to do a trimming and you go, whatever, they go through one of these processes that's outlined in our new ordinance. Are they gonna have to go through a whole nother process with the tree protection ordinance? Is it like another hearing? I mean, is there a way that we can tie these two together in the case where it is a tree that's under the tree protection ordinance? So it all gets dealt with through the same hearings?
That seems logical in that it's like, it's the same outcome for everybody, just one more. like,
Well, I mean, the difference is, there's a big difference. This tree ordinance is advisory. The other is mandatory.
Right,
You can't, yeah, I mean, there's a different, and under the law, right, you can't have a county board making mandatory cutting a tree or trimming a tree for views,
right.
right? This is a process, whereas the other goes to the Board of Supervisors. We don't want these coming.
Right, which one goes to the board? Is the restorative, I mean,
A protected tree goes to the Board of Supervisors
all of them?
on appeal, right?
Oh,
Tom?
yeah.
That's right. Yeah, they start out at the zoning administrator and eventually they can end up at the Board
So
of
I'm sorry,
Supervisors.
I'm not familiar with the process, so I might have to ask you just to explain it.
Yeah, explain the
briefly.
process of the protected tree ordinance.
Well, yeah, it's basically, and Curtis, you can jump in too, since you've looked at it more recently than me. The ordinance has a list of tree species that are protected. And so if you're gonna make changes to those, like, basically cut them down or trim them a lot, or do other things to that, you have to go in and get a permit from the county to do that. And the reason you have to do that is the board is determined through this ordinance that those trees are so important that you need to go through the process, and part of the process is determining whether the county is going to impose any kind of measures to mitigate the removal of the tree. So a lot of times, if some protected trees are removed, one of the mitigation measures is going to be that you have to plant new trees. I think in Kensington, that might not be the case, since it most likely would involve or affect just one protected tree. And so there may not be mitigation measures that the county would impose. But yeah, that's basically how it works.
So either Tom or Kurt, in your thoughts about this, you were like somebody who was going to be going through this process, where in the new ordinance would it get put that, like if you were going through like either the arbitration process or the mediation process, that you would also want to have a permit already in, or is that going to be what the tree arbitration board decides, that you have to do, a number of things, and one of them is go back and get the permit from the county to see if you can do this?
Yeah, I think that would be an outcome from the tree arbitration board. And I think that, pretty early on in the process, when you would get an arborist report, the arborist should know what trees are protected under the ordinance. And so, I mean, I think that would be part of the arborist report, or these are the steps that have to occur if this tree is going to be removed or trimmed.
And just as far as process goes, if you were to apply for a permit in that fashion, it gets noticed to neighbors, and after the ZA, the zoning administrator, they determine whether or not mitigations would be appropriate, or whether or not the findings are appropriate for removing or trimming the protected tree. They provide a notice to neighbors, and if there's no request for hearings, those permits are granted based on those conditions and those mitigations. If a hearing is requested, the planning commission holds a hearing on that, that's appealable to the board of supervisors. And to modify that process, you'd have to modify the tree protection ordinance itself.
Right. So probably if somebody's already gone through the arbitration process, they're not going to appeal it. I mean, I guess it gives them another opportunity to appeal it, which is kind
But I
of,
think you'd have some basis for some findings for the ZA at that point that are
Okay.
baked into perhaps your arbitration boards.
Sure. Right. So I guess my only other comment about it would be that maybe in section 816.2.416, which is implementation of restoration actions, maybe there should be another clause there that just states everything is subject to, for trees under the tree protection ordinance, that they would be subject to approval of a permit.
Is that what, I mean, that's sort of what it says under that. What page is that?
Yeah, page 5.
On 5.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, it's all in chapter 816-6.
Yeah.
I'm not seeing, sir, where is it? I'm sorry, I see page 5. Are you saying it's there?
It is there. So yeah, if,
let's give us the section number.
sure. It's 816-2.416 subsection A, and
Oh,
it's
A.
the second
Restorative
sentence.
act,
of it.
yes. A restorative action involving a protected tree must
Oh.
comply with 816.
Okay, it is there. Okay, I didn't see it. Thanks.
And if it'd be helpful, we could add the title to that chapter.
Yeah, why don't you do that? That would be good.
I think that's good. All right, I think there's a hand up by Wendy and then Catherine. Wendy?
Okay, and I'm sorry to hear, yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you great.
Okay, I did not hear a clear answer, and forgive me for going back to this, but I'm still concerned about
You're cutting out.
waiting for the first person.
You could phone in and, because we're not hearing you clearly.
Okay,
The link has a phone, so go to the link where there's a phone number and why don't you phone in?
sounds great, thank you.
Okay, and we'll go to Catherine.
Yes, hi. I wanted to talk a little bit about 2.410, which seems to be a list of, I'm trying to turn to it now, a list of factors to be considered in relationship to the tree, the benefits and burdens derived from alleged view obstruction. By considering the contribution of the tree. And when you look at the list, it's both positive and negative contributions.
Right,
And I would really like to see an additional item there, which is flammability of the tree as something to be considered in the discussion. And that's also because I see this list as something the mediator or the arbitrator or the judge is going to be referring to. And so I'd like to strengthen the issue of flammability, because climate change is not going to suddenly reverse itself, and we're not suddenly going to have get out of fire danger. We're, that's ongoing. So just like something like, just say flammability of vegetation or flammability of tree.
Tom, what's your sense about that? It is, so it doesn't directly address views, but is a relevant issue. I know we are considering looking at flammability, tree species and flammability on other, with regard to, communities that are right in high severity fire zones like Kensington is. What's your sense about that in this ordinance?
Well, you're right that it doesn't directly relate to the view, but there are also a couple of other things that don't directly relate to the view, like energy conservation and climate control and interference in efficient operations of a claimant's solar
Right.
energy system. So, I mean, it's up to you.
Yeah, it seems that it's a relevant issue, and like if it's a type of tree in which, especially in which the overhang and obviously, I mean, the issue of, a tree's flammable, right, whether it's trimmed or not. I guess maybe untrimmed can increase the flammability, I suppose, right?
Yeah, and then there's
Uh,
some species are more flammable than others too, I think.
Right,
Like
right.
eucalyptus.
Right, right. So I mean, the question is though, this is not, you know, people aren't being asked to cut their tree down here. They're being asked to trim a tree. So I guess just playing this out, if let's say it is a eucalyptus, and that, which is flammable, that would be a factor in consideration here, right?
Yeah, I mean,
Right.
I think it makes sense to include it if that's what you want.
Okay, we would think about the best way to word that, right?
Yeah, and I think it could either be in other tree related factors, or it could be its own subparagraph.
You can say other tree related factors, including but not limited to indigenous tree species, specimen quality, rare tree species, flammability, and historical value.
Right.
How's that?
Yeah, that makes sense. We can add that.
Okay. All right,
Thanks, great. And I have another one, but
Yeah.
I'll take a turn later.
well, go ahead. While we have you, why don't you go ahead?
Okay, well, this is not something I think we've talked about before, and I'm not sure where it belongs in the tree ordinance, but it is an issue, as you probably know. The Kensington Community Service and Police Board recently is considering, or perhaps has voted now, to cut down a great many Monterey pines and other trees in Kensington Park because of they see them as at some point down the road going to die because of beetles. And I have a situation of a Monterey pine across the street from me that's about 80 feet tall, very old, and leaning toward my and a neighbor's house and leading toward a bunch of telephone poles as well. So the tree is leaning now. It's very decrepit looking, and you know, I'm afraid of it falling on my house or my neighbor's house, and it taking down all those power lines at the same time, and possibly falling on the school kids going to and from school on Highland here. And I'm wondering where in the audience, where in the ordinance one could deal with leaning or dying trees.
This is presuming,
What?
this is presuming there's not a view. So I'm going to presume for a second.
Yeah, there's
not a-
no
it's
no
not a
view
view issue.
involved,
So,
right?
Tom, I mean, it's not a view issue. How would those issues be addressed?
And I've repeatedly asked my neighbor to take the tree down.
So is it on private property or is it?
Yes. Well,
Okay.
we think it is. I mean, around here, it's hard to tell where property lines are. I
Uh-huh.
mean, but it was planted by a predecessor of the neighbor and is presumably on their property, yes.
Okay, so
Although it is
yeah.
near a right of way.
Okay, so it possibly could be in the right of way. And then how far is it, or how close is it to, power lines and things like that?
Well, it's like an 80-foot plus tall tree, and it's falling downhill, and the power lines are, it's maybe 25 feet, 30 feet from power lines.
All right, so let me frame the question, because I want to make sure, because we almost have only till 3, so I want to try to frame the question. So good question. Tom, let's assume it's not on the public right of way, because if it's on the
Right.
public right of way, that can be dealt with. Issues for trees on the public right of way can be dealt with. If it's on a private property with the issues that Catherine mentions that potentially could be harmful to a neighbor, how are those addressed?
Well, let's, that's really, those are really kind of getting away from the view aspects of this, but I mean, I think that it could be, another factor where you're weighing the benefits of burden, assuming that you're at the point where it's blocking somebody's view and they want
Right.
to make a view claim. Yeah, but this ordinance really isn't an ordinance to cut down unsafe trees. That's a separate, you
What
kinda
is the
have to go to
existing,
court.
what's the existing remedy for that?
I think it's, you go to court and say that, that's a public or a private nuisance that's threatening my house, and let the court decide. I mean, I think in terms of this ordinance, we could add another factor to the benefits and burdens, kind of talking about,
Health of the
tree
tree. or
health,
something. Yeah.
tree health.
Yeah,
Okay, all right, so we'll add tree health in there, but I think it's important to note. So if it has a view impact and an additional factor is the tree health, as Catherine mentioned, but if it doesn't have a view impact, this ordinance is really not going to address that, right? I think that's the distinction to understand. If it has a view impact, it can be considered, but if it doesn't, then realistically, it's going to have to be dealt with a different way, right? Okay. Anything else?
Right.
Anything else, Catherine?
that's it. Thank you.
Okay, we'll
Thank
go
you
back
both.
to Wendy, since she came back in, and then go to Gail.
Thank you. 2 questions. One is, are we confident about the 100 feet, calling out within a radius of 100 feet in terms of notifying neighbors when meetings will be held? Because I certainly have trees, downslope trees, well over 100 feet from my home that absolutely impact my view. So I just trying to get clarity on why we're using the 100 feet.
Yeah, let me find that. Where is that in the ordinance? I'm looking, Tom.
On page 7, oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Page
no, go
7
ahead.
and page 8,
Under
under letter C.
Yeah, C, the Transportation Board. Okay, so what is our distance for the planning ordinance? I'm looking at that. The planning ordinance, I'm
It's
pulling up.
generally
300.
300 feet.
That's 300.
Yeah,
So why did we go with less?
I think, I mean, that's what's been in the ordinance for a long time. We didn't really change that, but probably,
I think we should go with 300 and be consistent, so it's not confusing.
that's fine.
Okay. We'll go with 300, so it's the same as the planning ordinance.
Right. Let me just double check that that's 300 feet, but
I'm pulling it up now. Let's see. I don't know if it's under this or a different ordinance, but yeah, if you could check. It basically says the notice provisions of 26-2.2004 of the code.
we can move on to the next question while we
Okay.
also search for that.
Oh, okay, and I just have one more question, and forgive me for bringing this up again. I did not hear a clear answer to my question, and I do think it's important. We talked about view meaning primary living areas, and I brought up a question around decks, and someone said, well, gee, yes, if it's a deck, you know, at the bottom of your property, it shouldn't really matter. I see many decks around our house that are right off the living room that cost tens of thousands of dollars to build many years ago, and people built them because they had amazing views. So
Right.
I just want to double check and make sure we all feel just fine about limiting it to windows as opposed to really what I think of as a living area that some of these decks off living rooms and kitchens provide.
No, I think you raise a good point, and let me see if I can frame this. So Tom, someone may have a deck on their second story overlooked with a grand view,
Right?
and someone may have a deck on their first story that doesn't have a view. So I
Right.
guess, so, I guess you would want to protect the view of someone constructed a deck. I mean, it's an interesting question. I mean, clearly, and every deck is different. There have been decks constructed off of people's, let's say, upper stories that have a view. That is an extension of the primary living area. So how would, if we want to protect those in the same, and this assumes again that they had a view, not that they don't, and that the view is taken away by a tree, wouldn't we want to protect that too?
I mean, yeah, that's basically a policy decision for this group and then for you and then for the board. So if you want to expand that, that's fine. I think it becomes, broader than what's in the Kensington overlay district.
Well, yeah, well, although, let me just say, I do think, yeah, I know, and that ordinance is habitable, the habitable area. The argument is how much is a deck habitable? Yeah, I think it's a legitimate issue. Like anything, it doesn't protect every view from every window. And this is one of the things that was come up with the planning ordinance is, let's say somebody has a really nice view from their second story, but the tree ends up blocking some view in the first story. These ordinances are a balance, and they don't protect every view from every window, especially if somebody has already, it may not be impacting some of the views, but that's going to be a balance that the KMAC has dealt with before. So yeah, I guess if it's from the primary.
I have a comment on that, John.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what our conversations were 20 years ago when we did the other ordinance. But I think something temporary like a deck. So you can't really use a deck all the time. And so like maybe you use it, a few times a year or maybe more, but that to me doesn't seem to have as much strength as a habitable space that you could use every day of the year. And I just worry that by extending that protection, that you'll get so many complaints and it'll just make it much more adversarial for people, as opposed to being just really clear that what we're talking about is views from habitable spaces, and regularly habitable spaces.
Yeah, it is a policy call. If there's a deck, let's say someone built that has a deck on their second story. Obviously, if they build a deck and there's already a tree, they can't force somebody to cut their tree for a new deck that didn't have a view.
Right.
That's clear, right? So the question, if someone had a nice deck extending off their living room, let's say someone says, well, I use my deck a lot. And it's like a living area for me because I hang out outside, right? Now, if it's an enclosed area, right, that would be a primary living area. But if it's not, and all of a sudden a tree blocks the view from the deck, should that be considered? In a case where somebody already had a view from that deck.
exactly. It would need to meet the same criteria as everything else. It's just, I see decks around me that have furniture, that have grills, where neighbors are out almost every night cooking and eating dinner. So just, and as I say, I'm fine either way. I just want this group to be prepared for those possible questions.
I think here we get into that whole notion of vantage and vantage point. As we've discussed in other meetings, and I think, John, you were the one who mentioned it. I mean, if you're in the corner of the bathroom and you can't see the Golden Gate Bridge anymore, that's not really a view that, we're
Right.
trying to protect here. And I think when it gets to decks, we can teeter precariously in this whole notion of vantage. Because what you see from what a person sees from within their home is one thing. What they see once they're out and they have other kind of vantages, they don't have the home itself putting certain limitations on their view. I think that would open a whole other can of worms, similar to what Gail said. I think it just would open up all kinds of litigation in addition to what's there already.
What does the Sausalito ordinance have?
It doesn't mention decks. So like I said, the language you used in terms of primary living areas, that's from Sausalito.
And this ordinance has not had decks in it before.
No.
Well, maybe, here's my suggestion. We don't include it, but if this is, next step I was gonna say is that this draft is gonna go to KMAC, right? For any further discussion at KMAC at a meeting. We'll see how the issue gets raised there, because there's nothing that prevents any changes coming out of KMAC.
Correct.
So let's do that. So that if that issue may get raised, we'll see. So we don't have it here, but it's still room if it comes up in a larger way at KMAC.
But is the intention of this group to broaden things, to invite additional litigation, to invite additional silliness from people? Or is it to clarify, perhaps narrow, and make more comprehensible to people just precisely what is and is not covered under this ordinance?
So here's what we should do. Let's flag that as an issue to get discussed further at KMAC. The issue of whether we should include protection from decks, specifically exclude them or be silent. So I think that's a legitimate question to talk about. Those of you that have raised it, I don't know, it sounds like this, I don't know where I would come out on this, and I want to hear from the community too. So maybe we flag that as an issue that KMAC can have further discussion about with input from the community.
Yeah, okay, so I could just add a note right in the definition of
Yeah.
view to discuss decks and whether those
Right,
should be included.
yeah, exactly. And by the way,
So the goal is to broaden.
I don't know yet. I mean, it either would be to broaden it, be clear. I mean, remember, KMAC gets input into, we always get a KMAC advisory before it goes to the county. So KMAC will put this up for discussion at KMAC with the same, you and others giving input to KMAC for any final alterations that could be made before it comes back to the county as an ordinance because remember, this has to go, Tom, would this go before a planning commission before us or go straight to the board?
Yeah, it goes to the planning commission first.
All right, so KMAC will make any last recommendations, and then it goes to the planning commission and then the board of supervisors. So there's going to be, and we should flag this issue for further discussion, whether it's expansive, more limiting, or silent.
So something that's never been included, you want to find out if there's an appetite to include. Not by Sausalito or any other community, but you want to include it.
I think it's worthy of discussion. I'm not saying it would be included. We're just trying to get the greatest amount of sort of community input and make a final decision about what we should do. I'm not saying where it goes, but just to get a little more community input.
Well, can we just get a sense of this group, like whether they feel?
Well,
like that's important to
I mean, there's only a handful of people here. I mean, I think all of you can weigh in at KMAC. I mean, it's not in the ordinance now. So
Every
be
single
clear.
person with a deck, whether they use it 2 days a week or all year long, is gonna want it. I mean, that's
Yeah.
clear.
No, I realize,
And I think the thing, like, if every person who has a deck brings that up, I think the question for those people is gonna be, well, where is the deck in relation to your windows of the rest of your house?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, do people agree that generally in construction, there's a main, what do they call it, a primary living area? And outside that primary living area, there's a deck, right?
right.
So again, I beg you to consider leaving it primary living
No,
area.
well, we are, the ordinance going forward says primary, is it worded? It's just that, look, there's nothing that prevents people, Shira, from raising all these issues anyway when it gets to KMAC. I mean, if it's raised here, it is likely to be raised there. And I just think so we're just gonna have that due diligence on discussion. It's not in the ordinance now. What's going to KMAC is not in the ordinance, but I just think we know it'll come up, and so it's just a placeholder that issue will get discussed. It's
Has
not,
it come up before?
I
It came
don't
up in this
know.
meeting. It came up in this meeting
It
is why
came
we're
up in this-
talking about
it's
it.
I'm
come up in
talking
this-
about in previous applications for.
I'd have to ask Kate, who no longer works in our office, whether she got, I don't know the answer, because she was the one that fielded the calls on these issues before. I just think if it came up here, one thing I've learned, it could conceivably come up there. And so we don't want to ignore it. And again, we're not saying to include it, but I think getting, just hearing more discussion or input on that. The KMAC folks are sharp. They may raise it on their own anyway. I don't know, because they deal with this issue in the development. They may have dealt with this issue on the development ordinance too.
Well, if it does ever include decks, they better be permitted decks.
Of course, yeah. So Shira, we're just having discussion. I think that's always good, I think, to err on the side of just hearing further thoughts. Then you raise an issue about whether 2.206D is grammatically confusing and whether it can be read as discouraging maintenance of trees. Should we look at that? 2.206D, which says discourage the planting and maintenance of trees that provide excessive shade and unduly diminish desirable views. So you think it could discourage maintenance of trees that provide excessive shade. What we want to say is we want to discourage the planting, and we want to make sure that the maintenance, the failure to maintain trees, right? I hear what you're saying, and maybe
So
Tom,
it's encourage the maintenance and discourage the planting if you want to go that far, but
Yeah,
you
discourage
can't
the
use them both
planting.
together.
and yeah, right. You hear that, Tom?
Sure.
Discourage the planting and encourage the maintenance of trees. Well, anyway, we'll let them reword it so it clarifies I think the point you're making, Shira.
It doesn't make
Okay,
sense because you don't want to keep a tree going that is creating shade or blocking views.
Well, but except, yeah, I mean, I think what they're saying is, maintenance of trees, that's right. You don't want to have the type of maintenance or lack of maintenance that will provide excessive shade. And then I think we understand, right, the sentiment, and Tom, you'll fix that.
Right. I mean, I think we'll play around with that.
All right, Gail?
Yeah, okay, so, and by the way, did Wendy ever get back on? Because I see.
Yeah,
hasn't
she
put in
did,
the
she
chat.
did.
Okay. Okay, so my,
I am calling in and enjoying the conversation.
okay, I just saw your chat. So I'm on page 6. This is section 816-2.606, arbitration before a tree arbitration board. So section C. So I have a question about when an arborist report really should be required, because my understanding, the arborist is really looking at what could be done to the tree. So if somebody's just filing the initial view claim and trying to establish that they want something done to the tree, but there hasn't been a discussion yet about what the options are. Should there be an arborist report submitted at that point, or should the arborist report come later? Because you're gonna have like the parties, having, the discussion about what should be done. Do they need to have the arborist report already at that point before they go before a board that might tell them to do something different?
I mean, I think the arborist report makes sense early, because if you go to page 7, on page 3, you're talking about mitigating actions proposed that would resolve the view claim. So I mean, I think that if you're going to be proposing mitigating actions, you want to have an arborist weigh in to see whether, that's going to work in terms of trimming or doing something to the tree.
Okay. So at the point then where somebody's really submitting a claim, they would have already had to have had the initial discussions about what might be done, because the arborists, they're not going to make a decision about whether there's a view violation, but rather what can be done to the tree.
Well, I think the board looks at all of that, but I mean,
Uh-huh.
they look at the view claim, they look at what's being blocked to make sure that it's, legitimate, but then they also look at if it is a legitimate view claim, what can be done to address that. And you do that, I think, through the arborist report.
Okay. What happens in the case though, where somebody wants to file a view claim, but they can't get the property owner doesn't allow the arborist to look at the tree yet, but they still want to try to, or is this only if both parties agree that they're willing to go through the process?
Yeah, so this is, let's see.
Yeah, arbitration
Yeah.
for the board is after both parties have agreed to go to arbitration.
Okay.
Yeah,
All
so
right.
yeah,
You can't
so
file-
mediation is the first step, and you don't necessarily need a arborist report for that, but
Right.
then, yeah, this is if you're gonna go before the board.
Okay.
and
So
parties
both
agree.
parties have to agree to that.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't really know too much about arborist report, but I would think that they'd be able to make a report without actually stepping onto the property.
Right. So there is no other action for making a view claim with the Board of Supervisors outside of arbitration.
Right.
And then on G, so it says that all mandated restorative actions must be initiated within 30 days. I just know from trying to get tree trimmers up here, it's been taking like sometimes up to 3 months. So I don't know if that's going to be actually possible. Although I guess you could probably get something scheduled on the books, but it won't happen necessarily within 30 days.
Yeah, I think initiation is, just as broad as, just setting an appointment.
Okay. And then I had a question about the final decision of the arbitration board and the written decisions. So, and this may be like if we're doing it using a KMAC or something, but who exactly does the writing? Because like my understanding from KMAC, since they're volunteers, they do it. But in this case, would it be staff of the Department of Conservation and Development?
I kind of missed part of that. There was a train going by.
Oh, sorry.
What was the question?
Oh, so, well, this may even be for Kurt, but I'm just wondering, like, so once the arbitration board issues a written decision to the parties, I'm wondering who actually is writing those? I don't know if it needs to be part of this, but I'm just curious, trying to understand like the administration of this whole process. Is it the volunteers that are on the arbitration board, or is it staff that would be writing these decisions?
Well, I think that it's the board, but then I think they could consult with staff, and then, staff could consult with us. I think that, if this ordinance goes through, we'll have to be meeting with conservation and development to kind of work with them practically how that is going to work out. But yeah, I think staff would be available to assist the board.
Okay.
And it would depend on what boards get established by the Board of Supervisors.
Right, well, like I was thinking, since we had one point talked about it being kind of maybe using the max, but I'm not even clear right now how I think our MAC in Kensington does their own. Is that correct, John?
Because their own what? Their own what?
Writes their own findings and reports, or does
They
that?
do. Yes, they do.
Hmm. Okay,
Yeah, I think they would probably want to get staff involved.
well, and that's another question then, like the capacity of the department to handle that at this point. I don't know how many of these we would get, maybe not many.
Yeah, it's hard to say.
And then I had another question, I think this is my last one. Can parties, so there's like this, you can choose like arbitration, binding arbitration or fact finding. And I was just wondering if parties can choose fact finding at first, go through that process and then return for binding arbitration.
Well, I think the way it's set up is that binding arbitration happens if everybody agrees, but then fact finding happens if one party doesn't agree. So, I mean, I don't know
Oh,
why once somebody didn't agree, why after they went through, the whole process, was completed, why then they would decide to go to arbitration. I don't think that would happen.
okay. So, the fact finding is a separate process, though. It's not like you could choose that and not go to binding arbitration.
I think, yeah, I don't think, I think if everybody agrees on binding arbitration, there's no point in going to fact finding. Fact finding in an advisory decision, that just happens if there's not, if like one party is really, I don't want to be involved at all. I don't want to be bothered, then the other party would go through the process. So then they have written findings of fact that they could take to court.
Right, but if they wanted to avoid court, which would be a lot more expensive than arbitration, they could still decide, the other party might at that point decide it's not looking in my favor, go into binding arbitration. I don't know, or just decide that they're gonna agree to do something. Sorry, my phone's about to ring.
I mean, I guess two parties could decide that they want to go through a fact finding and advisory decision, but the loser of that decision will never then turn around and agree to some binding arbitration by the same board. So probably just won't ever happen that way.
Okay. Right.
Can I ask another couple questions, please?
Yeah.
Let me see what it is. Page 4, 816, 2.410, number C, soil stability. We haven't really talked about that in our meetings. And in reading it, it seems to me like this is something that an arborist wouldn't necessarily be able to determine, but rather a soils engineer. And I'm wondering if the county would lend its expertise to this, or if it's something that an individual would have to shoulder.
Oh, let me understand. So where is it? Where is it relevant on the
That,
yeah.
that the benefit, it's under the benefits and burdens. For example, let's say that a tree is holding a hillside together, or appears to be. Someone would need to make that determination, whether it was just visually that way, or what the underlying soil structure, degree of slope. It seems like if we're including that, we should kind of point people in the direction of where to go with it, because up until now, the only reference we've made to outside professionals are arborists.
I mean, there's so many details where experts may be needed. I mean, I think that's going to be within the evidence or material provided to the hearing board. And a county, it wouldn't be the county doing this. This is a civil matter, and the county is not going to be expending funds to do soils report on this. So it wouldn't be the county. Someone would have to bring in their own, I guess an arborist probably looks at some of this. I don't know whether they're the right person or not. I just don't know. I mean,
I would guess that maybe an arborist would be able, I mean, because it does talk about the extent of the tree root system. So I mean, I think if an arborist is, worth his or her salt, they'll be able to know kind of what trees work in what types of soils.
Okay, I'm just asking, it just struck me that we haven't really discussed that one.
Yeah.
And my last question in this, so this has to do actually with the tree ordinance, not the TOV. So if we want to table this for another time, but it references trees in riparian settings. And I think all of us are aware that throughout Kensington, we have these underground creeks or these culverted streams and all this kind of stuff. But I've been trying to find out, like, where are they? And I have not been able to find anyone that has a map of them. So I don't know, like, what neighborhoods are impacted, what specific streets are impacted. It'd be good to know. And no one's been able to answer this.
Yeah, we can work on that separately. I think that's outside the tree ordinance issue. I think we're really trying to keep this simple to the tree ordinance, and yeah, and those are all important, good issues that if you were trying to find out, ultimately, I don't know if we have all that data. There's Public Works may have some data with regard to drainage issues, but I think that's a separate issue from the tree ordinance.
Okay, just looking again at the positive impact that our trees do provide, and this being one of them.
Right.
Thank you.
Sure. Gail?
Oh, well, I just want to say that I think, I'm pretty happy with where we're at, and I'd like to see this move forward since it's been sitting around for so long, that we maybe wrap and try to move this to KMAC at this point.
Yeah, that was what I was going to close with. I think the work group has really done really good work. And I think the whole purpose here is to craft an ordinance with a lot of good input. And the next step is County Council will make the changes we talked about today, and then we will go directly to KMAC. We're not going to have another work group meeting. I think we'll just go directly to KMAC. We'll let everybody on the work group know when it goes to KMAC. It may not be till the December meeting. The November meeting is addressing general plan update. So that's going to be pretty busy. So maybe December. So we'll let everybody know. And once they have their discussion and make their recommendation, we'll let the timing know of it, county staff preparing it to go to the planning commission.
And I would just say there should be significant outreach in Kensington. And I don't know at what point you want to talk about that, but we need to get something in the Outlook well in advance of the KMAC meeting. So
Yeah.
let's give ourselves some time.
Well, yeah, that's a good point. We have to first find out from KMAC when this will go to KMAC. Robert will work with them, and then we'll get the deadline from the Outlook. We can put something in the Outlook.
Okay, so you just know you have to get things in the Outlook by the 10th of the month before.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Well,
you
yeah.
need a 2-month lead. So I would suggest perhaps thinking about this in January, just.
Could be, right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So we would put it in the Outlook, go to KMAC, and then folks can give any input, and then, all right, sounds good.
John, did you want me to
That's
just
a great-
run over the changes just so that everybody's on the same page?
Yeah. Let's do that. We're over time, and I have another meeting I have to go to.
Okay, it'll be like a minute. First is on page 2, just change the definition of D to clarify what maintenance of trees means. Page 3 at the top, add the note on decks as an item of discussion. Page 4, under benefits and burdens, add language regarding flammability and tree health. Page 5, under implementation of restorative actions, include the title of chapter 816-6, which is the tree protection and preservation ordinance. And then page 7, about notice, change it from 100 feet to 300 feet.
Okay.
And that's from state law. I found that while you were talking. So 65091.
And what we,
Page 8 has that similar 100 feet that would need to be changed.
Yeah, anywhere there it's 100 feet notice, we'll change it to
Yep.
300.
we'll send everybody, once we get the draft from county council, we'll send it to the whole work group and let them know that it'll be going to KMAC. All right. Well, thanks, everybody. This was productive and
Thank you.
helpful, and we'll follow up. And it sounds like won't be, still a couple month process out. But we'll send it to you, let you know about KMAC, and then hopefully it moves forward to planning commission, board of supervisors. So it'll be in place sometime, hopefully in the first half of next year.
Okay. Well,
Thank you
thanks. It was
so
nice
much.
working with
Thank you.
everybody.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Tom.
you, Kate, and thank you, Tom and
Thanks,
Curtis,
Kurt.
for your work. Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
All right,
Okay, everyone.
thanks.
Thank you.